Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israel nixes the plan to forcibly deport African asylum seekers. Famed German composer Richard Wagner's anti-Semitic rants are purchased by a Jew, and Israeli researchers make a major breakthrough in genetics. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. In yet another shocking reversal, the Israeli government has just scrapped its controversial plan to deport forcibly African asylum seekers from the country. As of this moment, all asylum seekers will be able to continue renewing their temporary visas to stay in the country, and those who were already sentenced to be deported will be notified that those orders are canceled. This is a sudden reversal in a controversial story that's had its ups and downs lately. Last week, the state maintained that a deal with Uganda to accept deportees was almost a done deal. But just yesterday, the state admitted to the High Court that there is zero legal possibility of involuntary deportations. Hundreds of doctors, lawyers, Jewish congressmen, and even Holocaust survivors have called Israel's plan both immoral and dangerous. Asylum seekers previously deported to third-party countries have often fallen victim to human trafficking, extortion, or worse. For thousands of African men, women, and children living in Israel, who are mostly Christians from Eritrea and Sudan, today's news of the cancellation comes as a huge sigh of relief.
I am very happy to see the deportation policy is cancelled, and now it is the right time to the Israeli government to give a solution for the asylum seeker came from Africa, a refugee status, or to answer their asylum claim application.
Still, moments after nixing the deportations, Prime Minister Netanyahu took to Twitter promising to reopen prisons for African asylum seekers. These prisons were initially closed in order to greenlight the deportations in the first place, which means things have now essentially reset back to square one. All right, here with me now in the studio to try and take a closer look at this controversial court override bill are Israeli advocate and Assistant Director of Standing Together, Ari Fold, Attorney of Constitutional and Administrative Law, Hadass Brave, and Ran Bar Yoshafat, Attorney, Public Diplomacy Expert, and Lecturer. Sorry about butchering your names. Thank you all very much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Okay, so my first question I'll actually kind of open over here. Do you agree with the court override bill? And why or why not? I'll start with you, Hadass.
Thank you. I have to say that I feel very inconvenient with this clause, since the explicit intention of this clause is to narrow the jurisdiction and the discretion of the Supreme Court judges. And I think that if we look back since the legislation of the basic laws in Israel, the Supreme Court has acted very seriously and with a lot of discretion while interpreting the laws. So I think that going in this way and saying that the Supreme Court is being too much activistic is very troubling.
Again, I want to remind everyone that this law actually is not new. It was actually Aaron Barak, the president of the Supreme Court, with Yitzhak Rabin at the time, and his government with merits in the government. When they were talking about bringing pig into the country, it was Aaron Barak himself who made this law. He said, no problem, the Knesset can make a new law and override these Supreme Courts. So I'm not sure who's really breaking the laws here, because it was actually the Supreme Court itself who put out this clause in 1992, I believe it was.
Yeah, but
in terms of the courts itself, it's clearly obvious to everyone in Israel they've got involved in every aspect of political life. Now, there's not another place in the world, where the Supreme Court are elected by themselves and can outdo the jurisdiction of the parliament.
They're not elected by themselves. They have a committee.
There's a committee where the judges themselves have the veto of people who can get in. That's self-elected, in my opinion.
Ron, I understand you have a bit of a different take.
Here's what I find interesting. For some reason, people in Israel think that the Supreme Court will always have a better saying than the public and its representatives. And I'm not really sure why. Why would people trust the Supreme Court more than themselves and the representative of the public? Now, here's a scenario. Let's say that in 10 years from now, all of the Supreme Court judges will all be hawkish right-wingers. Will the left still want the Supreme Court to have so much power? How about we'll have a system? How about we'll have a system that says this is a proper system if you're in the coalition, if you're in the position, if you're a right-wing judge, if you're a left-wing judge. And currently the situation is that the Supreme Court, that the fact that we're saying the Supreme Court can overrule the legislative branch, it's weird. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how democracy works. The purpose of a Supreme Court in any democracy is to make sure that the current administration is not undermining the norms of a society. It's not supposed to set the norms of the society.
But it's my understanding that the courts are there to interpret the law and are not to put any partisanship into their decisions.
In theory, if that was the case, I would be supportive of that. I don't want to cancel the Supreme Court, but I'm saying that currently the Supreme Court is not working according to interpretations. It gave itself power.
So, okay, so then wouldn't that be a better solution to have the court function according to interpretations of the law rather than this kind of partisan thing that we then have to override?
The question, who's got the last word? Is it the government that's elected, or is it the Supreme Court that wasn't? And in most places, it's the government that's elected. There is, again, you have in Canada, you have another place in the world where you have this overriding rule, but the last word should be given by the people. The Supreme Court were not voted in. In America, the Supreme Court judges are put up there by the president as a political. Here in Israel, it's their own little group, and it's really, to take the power out of the people is undemocratic.
I think that democracy is not just the power of the people, it's also the ability to protect minorities, and we see it with the asylums regarding
So
they're not a minority of the country. They're illegal aliens. They're illegal infiltrators.
So that's
in your opinion.
No,
in other people's opinion, they are people which are being in danger.
No, according to the law, they are not.
Well, so that's I think in debate, because if we're going to talk about who has applied, who's faced difficulty in applying for asylum, who qualifies for refugee status.
In order to get asylum status, you have to apply.
I think that's a more complicated issue that we don't really have time to get into. But
three short points here. Number one, I'm not sure why the assumption is that the Supreme Court will take care of minorities, but the government will not. Let's say the Supreme Court is all right-wing, hawkish judges, and the government is all left-wing. I'm not sure that that's going to be, for my benefit.
But the judges right now are being elected by their professional skills, not by their political opinions.
So you trust people. You think that this group of people that I cannot change, I cannot touch their salary, they're there until their pension. You trust them more. A tiny group, that's dictatorship. That's not democracy.
These are the things that provide them the ability to make decisions professionally and not by political.
Tyranny. That's tyranny. Trusting a small group of people. That's tyranny.
Why does this group of people, according to your opinion, have the moral compass to decide for the nation? I'm a little confused by that.
Well, it's not the moral, it's the legal.
Hold on, because that's what I want to get at. I mean, is this a fair checks and balance kind of system the way that it is, and if it's not, what needs to be done to make it a fair check and balance? Is this the answer?
I think that if we review the cases in which the Supreme Court has overruled other laws, we see that it's very few laws which are very problematic. If we talk about the asylums, for example, and if we talk about things,
they gave citizenship to a Hamasnik who the government said they take away his citizenship.
It's not just that.
Hold on.
You would not even start the legislation process because you'll say, well, at the end, the Supreme Court is going to overrule it. So the fact that you're cutting it,
and hold on, is very important, I think.
I think it's
undemocratic.
But just to continue that, just in 2017, there were 5 laws that have been cancelled. So there's also a trend. The fact that you can say, well, in 1960, they only cancelled 1 law. Okay, but in 2017, they've cancelled 5 laws. And not all of the laws are so, in the heart of our debate in the Israeli society. There's a law that says how much pension you can give people that have a car. The Knesset said one thing, the Supreme Court said no. In 2012, everyone has a car. You need to. Are you experts in economics, in finance, whatever? How come you have the final word in that? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So I think that there are only few laws that were overruled by the Supreme Court since the constitutional revolution of '92, and since even the previous verdicts of the Supreme Court, which says that the Supreme Court has the right to interpret the law and say if it's constitutional or not. I think that there are not more than 15.
21.
21? Okay, so 21. It's a very reasonable
the
number.
verdicts gave themselves the power. The Supreme Court gave itself the power to overrule laws.
So then I have a follow-up question then. Let's say that the Knesset coalition passes this overrule law. What's a fair number in the Knesset vote to overrule that? Is it 61? Is it 70?
This already
80?
This already exists in the world. It exists in Canada, I believe it, but it exists also in the UK, if I'm not mistaken.
In many countries.
In many countries. And the idea is the following. The idea is the following. The idea is the power goes to the people. Again, you have to understand, during Nazi time, which I'm not comparing anything, the courts had the power to break the laws. They didn't do it. If you're worried about the moral standards, I have trust in the nation. I do. And they vote for their leaders. To say that a closed group of people, of elitists, have the power to shut down the Knesset, the power of the people is ridiculous.
So then again, what's fair? What's a fair number? Because in other Western parties, we're talking at least two-thirds majority to overrule anything.
I don't need that. Either 61 or 1 to 2. In other words, either it's just a majority, which, by the way, in 1992, that's what it was.
But it's simple.
No, it's not true. In Canada, you need a regular majority, okay, to overrule the Supreme Court. But here's the thing. I'm not against the Supreme Court. I'm very happy I have a Supreme Court. If anything, it's the opposite. I want to trust my Supreme Court. I currently do not trust him. And how many people will you have to have in order to overrule that the verdicts? It's only one part of it. Also, we have the seniority, the fact that the older you are, that's how high you're ranked in the system. The fact that they nominate themselves, I think, is a problem, and we need to address it. It's the whole structure of checks and balances. And I want to strengthen the Supreme Court in a different sense, in the fact that I want to trust it. And currently, I do not trust my Supreme Court, and I think it's very problematic.
Hadas, final comments, the response, if you have them?
Yeah, I think that when we look at the Supreme Court's decision, right on the last days, we see that the Supreme Court is very restricted. There are a lot of petitions. There are hundreds and thousands of petitions which are being filed to the court, and yet the court always says that it trusts and gives a lot of discretion to the ministry and to the Knesset. It only overrules the decisions while there is a basic problem with it.
Like if it's in contravention.
Let's just give a few examples. Drafting of Haredi people, the people who are allowed to come.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'd love to keep going, but unfortunately that's all the time we have. So anyway, thank you all very much for coming in. Ari Fold, Hadas, Brave, and Bari Shafat. Thank you very much. All right, moving on. A top Iranian official says that the regime plans a swift and decisive punishment against Israel in retaliation for an attack on the T4 airbase in Syria that killed 7 Iranian nationals earlier this month. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied carrying out that airstrike, but despite no official comment, army officials have hinted that the IDF has indeed been very active in Syrian airspace lately, specifically to keep the Iranian threat from Israel's borders. This threat from Tehran comes at a delicate time in Middle East affairs, a moment that could be a major turning point. Just yesterday, United States President Trump hosted French President Macron at the White House. Though the handshakes and hugs were cordial, the big issue on the table is the fate of the Iranian nuclear deal. President Trump has until May 12th to either renew American involvement in the deal or choose to withdraw from it. Such a move would likely cause the entire deal to collapse, and proponents of the deal argue that although it is imperfect, it does successfully keep nuclear weapons out of Iran's hands and allows watchdogs constant access to nuclear sites. Critics, however, which include Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, say Iran gets too much from the deal and that it should be renegotiated or scrapped altogether. Macron is believed to have pleaded with Trump to remain in the deal, considering the rest of the signatories remain committed to it, and that there's no Plan B alternative. With less than 3 weeks until the deadline to renew, the world is waiting on pins and needles to see what President Trump's decision will ultimately be.
But there is a chance, and nobody knows what I'm going to do on the 12th, although, Mr. President, you have a pretty good idea. But we'll see. But we'll see also if I do what some people expect.
Now, you may remember that the story of an Ethiopian-Israeli man named Damas Picada, who back in 2015 was serving in the IDF. One day, a police officer stopped him on his bike and apparently unprovoked began to beat him. Little did he know, a security camera nearby captured the entire incident. The resulting video ignited an entire movement of Ethiopian-Israeli activism against suspected racial targeting. Well, 4 years later, Picada is still in the IDF, and to top it off, he's actually a decorated soldier in the Army's elite cyber unit. This was the video seen around the world. Picada, 21 years old and wearing his IDF uniform at the time, on the day of his birthday no less, was shocked, to say the least, when an Israeli police officer suddenly assaulted him with no clear reason. The officer is later seen drawing his gun at a certain moment and threatening to put a bullet in Picada's body. Picada was 9 when he came to Israel with his 7 siblings, and by the age of 13, he'd lost both parents. But even though he grew up in one of the toughest suburbs of Tel Aviv, Picada became an icon for the community at an early age. He set up after-school math classes, as well as a local chapter of Zionist youth movement Bnei Akiva, in order to keep local kids off the streets and away from crime. After the video of Picada being beaten went viral, though, Israel's Ethiopian community began a series of protests. For them, this was concrete evidence of systemic racism and police violence that they'd experienced for years in the Jewish state. The prime minister met with Picada to offer him a personal apology, but outrage against the government continued after Israel's attorney general decided to close the case against the offending officer without any criminal charges. Israel's high court eventually reversed that decision on an appeal, but gave the officer a plea agreement that kept him out of prison and with 0 indictments on his record. But for Picada, who now holds top laurels in the IDF's Topaz unit, success may be the only true justice left. If you've ever had the chance to visit Israel, chances are you flew into Ben Gurion Airport. Ben Gurion is the country's single largest airport, servicing nearly 90% of all flights into and out of the state. Well, the airport has just announced a massive new expansion, and ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the details. So, Brett, how big are we talking here?
I'd call this a very major overhaul, in my words. Officials at the local airport authority say that they're expanding service stations, adding dozens of new check-in counters, and augmenting the new pass-drawing that just went live a few months ago. So they're estimating that this is going to be a 1 billion shekel makeover, and that's nearly $250 million US. So it's big.
Wow, I mean, yeah, no, that's definitely quite a chunk of change. But I mean, as you mentioned, this comes just 2 months after the new passenger wing E, as I understand, opened up. So why the need for even more expansion now?
Well, last year Israel hit, as we know, a record high number of tourists, almost 4 million, a little over 3 million. The summer season is about to start here, but we're already seeing that tourism rising just as it was before. Last year there were almost 21 million entries and exits. Next year the state expects something like 25 million arrivals and departures from Ben Gurion. Wait times at the airport right now aren't necessarily, terrible, but with numbers like these estimates, you're going to need the facilities to back it up. And even now, ahead of any construction, airport staff is setting up a new temporary service counter station in a small structure across from the main terminal, that's Terminal 3. So they're already bracing.
I mean, yeah, it's getting pretty interesting because even with last year being a record high for tourism, as you've just said, there are a lot of analysts who say that there should actually be way more tourism than there actually even is. So if the airport authority is putting 1 billion shekels into this, I guess they're putting their money where their mouth is? Or?
Yeah, or at least where they hope their mouth is anyway. I mean, look, those analysts do have a real point here. I mean, flashback a couple years ago to 2014 when the Gaza war broke out during Operation Protective Edge. Israel's tourism ministry took a big hit from that, and it took a few years for foreign tourists to finally feel safe about even coming to Israel again. And it kind of goes both ways, of course. I mean, Israel is also a common access point for travelers to reach the Palestinian territories. So you could say that when Israeli tourism takes a hit, so does Palestinian tourism, which is in its own kind of an interesting paradox in that way.
Sure. I mean, it doesn't hurt that there are a ton of new low-cost airlines actually that now fly in and out of Terminal 1, like WOW Air and Ryanair, which certainly makes traveling all the way to this side of the world a lot cheaper.
Oh, sure. I mean, I have a few friends actually who visited Israel for their first time totally on a whim just because they found, a cheap ticket online. Now, look, there's obviously more to life than politics, but again, they came because they felt like Israel and the Palestinian territories were a safe place to travel around, which at the end of the day is ultimately what you think about when you're, planning a vacation.
That's a good point. All right, now, thanks for the details, Brad. Thank you for your report. And now, for some, the sweeping operas of German composer Richard Wagner are important musical masterpieces. But for others, especially Jews here in Israel and around the world, Wagner's legacy is far more sinister. The composer is infamous as being Hitler's favorite musician, and outside of his musical works, Wagner often spewed anti-Semitism to any in the intellectual class that would listen. Well, a letter containing some of those anti-Semitic arguments has just been sold in an auction in Jerusalem so that it can live on as a testament to Wagner's controversial legacy.
It's not a big surprise because he wrote a book that he showed that the Jews cannot be good musicians, and that's what he's explained as well in his letter. But still, it's kind of a proof that how deep was his anti-Semitism.
The letter is sold for $34,000 to an anonymous Jewish collector from Switzerland. Before that, it had been obtained by a collector here in Israel who likely won it in a European auction decades ago. The letter contains Wagner's arguments to French philosopher Edouard Schorr, contending that the Jewish spirit had corrupted modern culture. It was written in 1869, around the time Wagner had written an anti-Semitic essay titled Judaism in Music. Though he was widely known for expressing his anti-Semitic views, evidence as apparent in this letter demonstrates the lengths he went through to spread those ideas among the intellectual class. For these reasons, Wagner's music is rarely even played here in Israel, where the notes remind Israelis of the Holocaust more than the intended melodies. Okay, Israeli scientists have just made another world-shattering first. A team at the Hebrew University has just created an incredible new atlas of the human genome. This atlas incorporates actual embryonic stem cells to not only create a more detailed map than ever before, but one that also reveals the role that every last gene plays in creating the human body. This is a potential game changer of a breakthrough in all kinds of ways. Stem cells have the unique ability to adapt into whatever kind of cell is around them. By creating a sort of living stem cell-lined map of the human genome, all kinds of secrets about which genes control exactly what function in the human genetic code are illustrated. This offers scientists a whole new understanding of which genes cause mutations, which could be used to counter those mutations, and even opens the door to a whole new field of gene therapy. The atlas also helps identify which diseases can be traced to genetics and which seem to come from mutations throughout our body's growth. Another interesting revelation from this research is the discovery that only a small percentage of our genes are even essential for keeping stem cells alive in the first place. This means that when the human body is still just an embryo, potentially less than 9% of our entire DNA is responsible for keeping us alive. Narrowing these genes down from the tens of thousands in our genome is obviously essential to treating diseases baked into our genetic codes from birth. After a discovery like this, though, who knows what Israeli scientists will come up with next. So what would a week of news be without a little Gal Gadot thrown into the mix? But this time, Israel is not the one praising the superheroine. Time's list of the 100 most influential people of 2018 is giving credit where credit is due, and ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh has the details.
Thanks, Aaron. That's right. Our very own Gal Gadot made the list for Time's 100 most influential people of 2018, and we could not be prouder and, of course, not shocked in the slightest. Gadot, who's gained international recognition for her role as the superhero Wonder Woman, was nominated for the 2018's list by none other than American actress and former Wonder Woman, Linda Carter, who played the role back in the 1970s TV series.
That's actually amazing.
I know.
I love how that goes full circle.
Me
like
too.
that.
I couldn't agree more. The support that Carter has shown for Gadot is absolutely amazing. She's praised her for all her hard work, saying, quote, Gal is a wife, a mother, she has served her country, traveled the world, and is hardworking, loving, goofy, and full of humanity. I mean, what else can we hope for when talking about our very own?
No, I mean, I agree there. And I really think it's well-deserved. I mean, in 2017, Wonder Woman film garnered more than $800 million worldwide in the box office. And it's actually, the fifth highest-grossing United States superhero movie of all time. So it's safe to say that objectively, Gal killed it.
Right, but it's important to mention that her role in the film is definitely not the only reason Gadot was added to the list. With her millions of followers across all her social media platforms, Gal has made it her mission to stand for women's rights, equal pay, the Me Too movement, Time's Up. She's also refused to work on the Wonder Woman sequel until Brett Ratner, the film's producer, who was accused of sexual misconduct, was taken off the movie, in which he has since left the project. So it is safe to say Gadot is not afraid to speak up.
As she should be, not afraid. She has so many young people looking up to her. She's definitely a positive role model. But again, Gal isn't the only Israeli on the list, right?
Right, that's right. Aaron, Israeli-born co-founder of WeWork, Adam Newman, also made the list again. Not too shocking in the Times Titans category. Newman was nominated by Mark Benioff, who is the CEO of cloud computing company Salesforce. Mark went on to praise Newman by saying, quote, by enabling the next generation to come together to work and play in a whole new way, Adam shows how we can make a life, not just living.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that Adam most definitely deserved his spot on this year's list again. WeWork really has revolutionized the way we operate and collaborate with people. I actually even read a report that says over 240,000 workers from businesses of all sizes all around the world have been attracted to WeWork, and that the company is actually now spread across 21 different countries.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, before WeWork was founded back in 2010 and is actually valued today at an insane $2 billion. So it's more than safe.
20 billion, I thought.
20, yes, 20 billion. Sorry, it's safe to say that these two Israelis definitely earned their place on this list.
All right, well, thank you very much for the report, Emmanuel.
Thank you.
All right, and now for our Hebrew word of the day. We just unveiled some of Time Magazine's top movers and shakers for 2018, and that's why today's word is lashpia, meaning to influence. We never really know what mashpia aleinu, or influences us. It could be a color or a song that mashpia or influences our mood, or maybe it's alcohol, tobacco, or even cannabis that mashpia on your state of mind. The truth is that we don't really ever know the length to which we mashpia or influence each other. In fact, to quote Nikola Tesla, our sphere of external hashpa'a or influence extends an infinite distance. So remember to always put your best foot forward, because what you do and do not do is important. And with that, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Both tonight and tomorrow, you can expect cloudy skies and occasional rainstorms. Tonight, the low should be about 60 or 16 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow we'll have very little change in temperatures with a high of 70 or 22 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.58 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for watching.